We're ready to go.
Roll call, please. Trustee Bree, here. Trustee Hallwack, here. Trustee Rubin. We have a quorum. Okay, I don't think there's any minutes. So if we want to, consideration of the minutes, can I have a motion to?
Motion to approve.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Nice job. Yes. All right, Nikki, walk us through.
All right. Oh,
There we go.
thank you.
Yes, sir.
This one counts.
Should, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, so good evening, everyone. We're going to talk about the February treasurer's report tonight. We'll go through the major fund highlights, our cash flow projections, and our CIP updates for the month. So we have continuation of good news. General fund is performing very strong still, so that's a good sign. Our property taxes, though, are now lower than the prior year by about $250,000. This is 15.9% of the budget, but it's now a lot more comparable to last year. We have two anomalies kind of going on here. Because of the large amount of property taxes that we received in January, that's now kind of offsetting the larger amount of property taxes we received in February last year. So we're actually pretty close year over year. This February, we did not receive a lot of property taxes because that first installment due date has been extended to April. So now we're kind of in a delay game again. If we back out the receipts that were really attributable to the prior year, we're actually looking at a little bit of a deficit. So we'll talk about that at the fund level on a property tax basis. But the good news is we did advance that amount of money to the police pension fund at the end of the year. We've recouped all of that money. So the police pension is whole and now the general fund is whole as of last year's tax levy. On a sales tax basis, that continues to perform strong as well. This is November sales. So you'll recall there's a 3-month delay from point in time that sales occur when we receive the money. That was higher than this time last year and budget. And then all of the revenues that were higher than last year and budget this month were places for eating tax, telecom tax, building permits, use taxes, ambulance fees, and parking fees. Telecom tax is kind of an anomaly because we've really seen that decrease year over year. But it is continuing to perform strong this year. So that's a good news story. On the expenditure side, we are higher than last year and at 13.5% of budget. We're at 16.7% through the year, the fiscal year so far. So we're kind of running below where we would expect. On expenditures is really timing basis. We see a lot of that will pick up over the summer with project expenditures. Moving on to the water fund, this is really kind of where we would expect at the beginning of the year with colder temps. We don't see that high water revenue related to irrigation, but we are still higher than this point in time last year because of our water rate increase that took effect January 1st. That's being phased in throughout the first quarter for all the bills that will be issued through March. And then in April, that will be fully implemented across the board. Our volumetric revenue, there's really not a whole lot to write home about. We're talking about $5,000 more than last year, $3,000 more than last year, but it's still a positive direction. On the expenditure side, we're a little bit higher than last year. Some of this is just due to general operations, but we're still well under budget in terms of expenditures in the water fund. We do expect that to pick up. There is going to be a reimbursement resolution on Thursday night's agenda for the village board's consideration. That will allow us for when we do issue the alternate revenue bonds later this year to recoup any expenditures that happen in conjunction with the water main replacements between now and the time we issue bonds. So that those expenditures will start to pick up here, especially if the weather stays like this. New this month, based off of the feedback that we received from the committee last month, we have fully integrated the golf fund into the monthly financial report. So this means it's included in all of the attachments, including the cash flow spreadsheet at the back of the report. So I'll be curious to hear some feedback from the committee as to what you think about the information that we've included. And I'll say that from a financial standpoint, overall revenues are where we would expect at this time of year. There's not a lot of golf going on right now, but expenses are 26,000 less than last year. We are just starting seasonal hiring this month, and that will continue through the start of the season. And I'll turn it over to Stella to talk a little bit more about operations.
Just a couple of highlights. Open Kitchens, as you know, is going to start with us this year. We finalized their menu. It's available on the Glencoe Golf Club website right now. They've increased a lot of appetizers, trying to keep people to hang out a little bit more after the round. Hopefully everyone will come out and enjoy a meal or an app with Open Kitchens this year. Our senior membership card sales have doubled their budget so far, having a large increase. I think the people from Winnetka are very interested in joining our program there. And then our opening day is tentatively set for the 24th. There are some surrounding golf courses that have opened, but they don't really take too much pride in their conditioning. Right now, if we open, it's very wet and it would do some long-term damage to the greens and the turf. So right now we're looking at the 24th.
In terms of debt service, MFT, capital funds, and personnel. Our debt service fund, MFT and capital projects fund really don't have that much activity because it's so early in the year. Although I will just note that the debt service fund was in a very similar situation to the federal fund. Part of our property taxes are directed directly to the debt service fund that pay our outstanding debt. So there was a large influx of cash in January in the debt service fund, and now we're playing catch up into this year's tax levy. Expenditures are expected as expected. Again, it's minimal activity, especially with the debt service fund. We really don't see any activity with that until June. So we pay that in June and December. We make our debt payments. On a personnel standpoint, our overtime remains elevated due to vacancies primarily in the CT department. All other increases year over year related to cost of living adjustments and increases related to the collective bargaining agreements. Oops. Summary at the back of the report referring to the cash flow projection spreadsheets. On a revenue basis, in terms of performance versus budget, we're looking at a $533,000 surplus on the general fund just compared to revenue budget. If I remove property tax from that dollar, we're looking at a deficit for the year of 1.2 million. Hoping that will catch up with the delay. This is just a year-to-date number. So the further that we get along in the year, that should course correct. So that's entirely related to the delay in the first installment, looking as of February 28th.
Why would you pull out the property tax when we still expect it?
Just the January receipts that would belong to last year. So if I'm just comparing apples to apples, what happened last year versus what happened this year, as of February 28th, we're running behind. So had Cook County been on time in December, we would just be running a deficit of 1.2 million. But as we're starting to see property taxes slowly coming in March, we should see a large influx at the beginning of April. So that should catch up. So we'll keep track of that, just apples to apples. On the water fund, we're seeing a very modest $3,500 surplus as compared to where we would expect the revenue to be versus the budget. When we add in expenditures, the general fund is projecting a $1.8 million deficit. This is a direct result of, we had a budgeted planned drawdown of $1.4 million this year for capital. And then you may recall last month at the village board meeting, we approved an amendment to this year's budget for rollovers from last year. And that added another approximately $400,000. So all of that drawdown is planned for capital. So we'll continue to report on that as we start to see revenues come in throughout the year. And then the water fund is projecting a $2.7 million surplus. The primary driver of this obviously is the alternate revenue bonds that we're planning for June. And those are offset by some significant water infrastructure projects that we have planned for this summer. As of February 28th, the unaudited fund balance in the general fund is sitting about $12 million. That's 53% of our operating expenditures. The water fund is at 3.8, which is at 67%. Both of these are in excess of our fund balance policy, but we are purposefully aggregating these reserves for drawdowns for capital. So they're in a healthy perspective in terms of what we need going forward. On an inflationary impact, one of the new and fun items that we're starting to see are paper products are almost impossible to find any type of specialty product. This came up. So this came up with our vehicle sticker license renewal. So sometimes we will use different color return envelopes to help them stand out in the mail when we're returning vehicle stickers back to you or when they're being returned back to us. Luckily, we had enough on hand for this season, but our provider told us that basically you just can't find anything that's not your standard product right now. We've also run into this with utility billing inserts. If we were looking at like a full color or a half sheet insert into the water bill, that paper is very difficult to find. So this is kind of a new and fun item that we're struggling with now. Also, the lead time on some replacement and stock parts, particularly at the water plant, if it's not on the shelf, we're finding that the lead time on ordering a lot of our replacement parts is just much longer.
Is that easy to prepare for?
We do have stock. I mean, I'll defer to Dave, but we do keep some stock. I think if we had a run on replacement parts, of
What would that run be at?
get into a trouble, but I would think we would have
Yeah,
sufficient stock. I'm not.
We're not at an urgent state, but it's just that is a fact that we're not seeing parts available like they normally would be.
Yeah.
And the same goes for the maintenance shop for vehicle parts too. We're just seeing higher prices, higher lead times. On a whole, looking across all funds, including the golf fund, our commodities are generally higher than last year. They're at 27.8% of budget. I do believe at this point in time, it's just timing that we've had an influx of expenses that we didn't have this time last year. Our contractual services are higher than last year, but those are within budget. So that's where we would expect them to be right now. So at this time, we don't have any concerns about handling any of these expenses in terms of increases. Just a quick update on our favorite topic to talk about vehicles. You probably recall from last month, we ordered 6 patrol vehicles and we've received 1 already. So we do not have estimates of delivery time on the remainder yet, right? That has not changed. In the Public Works Department, we're still waiting on 2 leaf vacuums. The first one was ordered in January last year. We're not expecting that until later this month or early April. The second one is expected the 3rd quarter of 2023. The aerial lift truck that was approved at the last board meeting is expected the 3rd quarter of this year, as is, I guess, the dump body and the salter is a little bit earlier, June or July. And then coming soon, we also have a replacement of truck 3 in the water fund. That will be our next challenge to locate. And it sounds like our best option may be to be looking at lots to see what becomes available. So we may or may not be able to get that vehicle this year. Answering questions on any of the items. Any feedback on the golf club fund and the information provided? Kind of what you were thinking.
Yeah.
Less.
This is exactly what, just to get it into the cycle, so it's thought of same as the other one. Good.
If you have any other questions on the report, I'll turn it over to Margaret for our CFP update.
Good evening. I have a very brief report this evening. Your quarterly, monthly CIP March reports are in your packets. We have updated some of the delivery and completion dates for the projects with the most current information that we have at this time. Some notable changes, a good news story. We finally got an infrastructure switching piece of equipment that IT ordered last year. It was approved in January or February of 22, I should say. And we just received it in January, so that's good. The bluff crib wall engineering and lower access ramp replacement is going to be brought to the board this Thursday for approval. And then this was scheduled to be completed in July of 23, but we've moved that completion date out to November of 23, and staff can speak to that if you would like them to. And then the sidewalk improvements repair and replacement project was brought to you in February instead of March, so ahead of schedule. That's it for this evening.
Just a quick thing on the crib wall, it's essentially a phased, we're taking a phased approach rather than an all approach. In an effort to maintain ADA access to the beach during the Park District's beach season, which begins right after Memorial Day. So we're doing the crib wall itself, the retaining wall, which is that first phase, that should wrap up before or around Memorial Day. You may also remember, we've got about a $700,000 grant from the state of Illinois that is in the current year's budget, the state's current year budget. So we are going to be able to spend those dollars before the June 30th deadline that the state has on that first phase of the project. So those dollars are not.
Is the 1.7 in the phase or is that the whole cost?
That's the whole cost. Yeah. The first phase is about $950 or give or take.
We're not on that one, right?
Okay. Guess I have one question. Anybody have a sense of referendum for the grant fund or getting any feedback, experience?
I've had this conversation a few times this week. Not getting a ton of feedback, which is hard to know whether that means anything or not.
Yeah.
I will say the village's mailer, the information mailer that relates to the referendum question will hit mailboxes Wednesday or Thursday this week. That probably will generate or prompt some additional questions. We've gotten maybe a handful of questions relative to property tax impact, relative to why this, why not something else. But nothing that's been overly outrageous in terms of outrage that the village is bringing the referendum question forward. So it's hard to really see. There's been Dan Dorfman just issued an article today on it. Dale Thomas, who's the president of the Friends Board, is mostly quoted in it as opposed to anybody from the village. But there have been a few articles written on the project. There's also, I understand, going to be a one-pager that the Friends of the Golf Club have inserted into the Stroll, which is the magazine that is delivered to everybody in Glencoe. So I think that's supposed to be delivered this week. So that'll be in there too. So that all those things may generate some questions, comments, concerns, but we haven't heard a lot. We haven't heard a lot.
I haven't either. To be honest, when I mention it to people, they don't.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's hard to get a solid handle.
Yeah. So
We received our early ballots on Monday.
you did.
Yeah, matter of fact, I encouraged my wife to vote in a certain direction, and she said, "Oh, it's too late. I already sent it in."
Anything else? Any other items? All right, short meeting.
No, I'm sorry.
Sorry with that.
Sorry with that.
Motion to adjourn. Yes. Yes. You got it right this way.
I'm giving you 1 minute, but here we go.
Actually finish that fast?
So we're done already. All right.
right,
So I take it there was nothing that didn't leap off the page in the materials.
Did we adjourn?
No, there's no motion to adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, good meeting. Way to go.